Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. It's great to see some familiar faces, and thank you very much for showing up this afternoon. Very important topic for us. This year, we've decided to undertake a little bit more advocacy work, and this, I guess, falls under that category. Also, I've had to hand off a little bit of the responsibility on this to someone who is, I consider, our active local expert. He's the past president of the society, and that's Robert. And Robert will be coming up to do our presentation and fielding questions afterwards. I'd like to just read something here. Lawn Bowling and IOCO. The IOCO town site stands as one of a few surviving early company towns in the Lower Mainland. It is a distinct district with special heritage value to the city of Port Moody and has been identified for long-term protection for heritage conservation purposes. Creating a heritage conservation area for IOCO town site was the first step towards achieving the appropriate revitalization of IOCO. The IOCO area included a lawn bowling green, and the previous Parks and Rec Master Plan recommended that the city work with Imperial Oil, the landowner, on restoration of the bowling green. Those efforts were not successful, but a group called the IOCO Heritage Lawn Bowling Association continues to lobby for revitalization of the area. The city's OCP has detailed policies and guidelines for conservation and revitalization of the IOCO area. Now, this is right from our Parks and Rec Master Plan, and it also says in there as a recommendation that the city, this is recommendation 456, that the city will continue to support activity at the bowling green at IOCO. So the city is committed through various documents, and we're going to hear more about that from Robert. So Robert, would you like to take the mic? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thanks, John, for the introduction, and thank you for coming out this afternoon. I know we were planning to do this on Wednesday, but weather kind of stalled that a little bit, so thank you for coming out. My purpose this afternoon is to really give you folks an insight as to the IOCO town site. Its real purpose, what's there today, and what we as an organization, that's the Heritage Society, is attempting to advocate for from a standpoint of the revitalization of it. So the town site basically exists, and what we're looking for is a way in which we can protect, preserve, rehabilitate, but more so to revitalize. As it sits today, it sits in a static state. But what can we look at from ways in which we can actually revitalize the town site into a vibrant village community? So just a short history. So Imperial Oil began construction in 1921. Now, interesting, 1921. 2021, 100-year anniversary for the town site. So remember that, because it's very important that when we get through these types of discussions, we think about these significant anniversaries. The IOCO school was built in 21. It was used up until the mid-2000s. Today it sits in a static state. It had replaced a one-room school that had been sitting on the inlet. Community Center was built in 21. Basically, it was used up until the early 1990s. There was upgrades made in the mid-1995s, and in going into that building, even as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, it's still pretty solid. Actually, it's interesting when you go inside it, there's a curtain on the stage that still shows the IOCO Community Society. Okay, now whether it's still there, that was 3 years ago, but it's interesting how, as a community center, it was a vibrant center for the operation of the refinery, but also as a center house for the community. The grocery store was built in 22. The church, the original United Church, was built in 24. It was originally a Presbyterian church, and of course, recently it's been amalgamated with the St. Andrews on St. John's. So by the late 1920s, they developed a thriving community. There were 89 structures, 83 homes, 2 churches, community grocery store, community hall, a bowling green, a baseball diamond, tennis courts. It was a self-contained community. So for any of you who have had the opportunity to live in a company town, this basically was your place to live. You did everything there. You could get together, socialize, you could have a great community party, you could have all sorts of visitors come to your community, and in fact, there were times for IOCO that they were in fact noted as having world-reclaimed Bowling Green participants. Okay? This gives you an idea what the town site was developed as, and on the right as you look at it, you're going to see what buildings still remain based on the original footprint, but there's some losses. And unfortunately, this was from the time when the actual town site was declared a heritage conservation in 2002. There was an assistant supervisor's house, unfortunately, close to where the bowling green is and the recreation area, that was destroyed by fire. There's been 2 buildings since the original designation that have been considered not able to be rehabilitated because of their current state of decay. And the Tremaine residence. Interesting, the Tremaine residence. When the sale of property took place between Imperial Oil and Brilliant Circle at the time, now called Gillick, Brilliant Circle were committed to basically use the Tremaine house as a place that they were going to restore and have it as a community gathering location on the town site. And that was going to be where they were going to center their opportunity to discuss what they wanted to do with the town site. Since the time that they made that declaration, unfortunately, they have stopped doing any work on it, and it sits there still in its current state. Also, what's happening on the town site, and for those people that live on the town site, of which we know there's 2 private property owners, they're aware of the fact that there has been security fencing that was built around some of the buildings that's been stolen. We've had illegal dumping, which continues on the site, and we have had, incidentally, homeless camps that appeared on the site. In fact, in one of the buildings, for myself and for one other member here today, we actually observed that it had been broken into, there was people living in it, and Port Moody Fire had to go up and sort of secure the building, and that was where we had the property owner of the time, today Gillick, go in and actually re-secure the building and put stronger fencing around it. So a little bit of unfortunate situations that have occurred since the town site was declared a heritage conservation area in 2002. So what actually exists today? Well, we have the IOCO Church, and we have 2 private residences. The 2 private residences exist on what is property still owned by Imperial Oil. We have unoccupied buildings of which public access is totally restricted. So the current landowner and the previous landowner, Imperial Oil, refused anybody access to these buildings. So we have the community hall and groceteria, we have the school and gymnasium, of course that's owned by School District 43, and we have 11 homes, which 4 of them are on Imperial Oil land and 7 on Gillick. All of these are basically still sitting there, but they're not accessible to the public. Recently, we've been made aware, because of some comments that have been made at council, that the city has asked the landowners to go back in and review the current statuses of the buildings. So for your information, particularly for the unoccupied buildings, the ones on Imperial Oil land, the community hall and the groceteria, and the houses, and also all the houses on the Gillick property, the Gillick owner has put power into those buildings. They're trying to ventilate them to basically forego any type of further deterioration. And they've been asked to go back in and do a reassessment to see if there's any deterioration going on. We haven't seen any report back on that, but the city, we understand, has made a request because on one visit to the property about 4 weeks ago when I was out there were representatives from Gillick actually going through the buildings. It was quite ironic that when I was there, they were there, and that's what they were doing. So that gives you a sense of what those buildings are. In addition, there's the recreational area, which is the former bowling green and sports fields. And as well, not to forget, that another key property owner out there is the city itself, who owns all the roadways, the laneways, the village creek, and all the civic utilities. So there's a multiple of property owners that exist on the property, and that's what we basically have out there today. Just some key dates to recall with respect to what's transpired regarding the heritage conservation. September 10, 2002, the conservation area bylaw was adopted. So there was the city's statement of intent as to what it wanted to do with this particular area of land within the city of Port Moody. They wanted it to be a heritage conservation area. That's not something the city does all by itself, but it is something that they basically take input on from many parties to say this is important for us to declare as a heritage conservation area. Of course, we have the IOCO Ghost Town Days. First one held in October, somewhat to celebrate the creation of the bylaw. And in 2003, the Lawn Bowling Association was formed, and there's been multiple attempts to try to, as was mentioned by John, to recreate an active lawn bowling center out there, all of them which unfortunately have not succeeded. 2009, something that many people probably don't recall is that Imperial Oil, when they owned a larger section of land, which is both the east and the west side of the town site, excluding the school, did make sort of a preliminary presentation as to a conceptual plan for the site. It also included actually all of the other properties that Imperial Oil owns in the general vicinity. So it was quite a grand, but a very, very preliminary perspective. And it was abandoned. I think it was abandoned just because it was way, way too much for what was anticipated could be done in that particular property. But just to recall that there was certainly discussions on how to basically revitalize the town site. And then in 2015, January, Brilliant Circle purchased the eastern portion of the town site. And some people maybe not appreciate that they only bought half of the town site. The other half of the town site, or the western portion, continues to be owned, with the exception of the two private properties, by Imperial Oil. And they have stated for their intent, this is Imperial Oil, that that piece of property to them is an industrial buffer zone. We've tried to, as an organization, seek clarity as to what they mean by that, and they've been adamant to say that it's an industrial buffer zone, and for that perspective, they're making comments to say that basically they don't want to see any type of public access on the land. They would much rather see all the buildings cleared off the land. The major concern, of course, in that is that the two major public amenity buildings that still remain on those lands, the community hall and the groceteria, are on the Imperial property. So it's a concern from a standpoint of the revitalization on what the status of those two buildings will be. Since Gillick bought the property, a key item to note is that when the heritage bylaw was put in place, there was references made to what is meant by heritage conservation. And there are some federal guidelines around what you need to do heritage conservation from the standpoint of protecting it and revitalizing it, but it's pretty general. Again, from some of the work that this organization did, and particularly with a strong emphasis by Mary Ann Cooper, the city actually went out and commissioned Don Luxton, an organization, to document what is meant by heritage preservation. What is the demand on a property owner in one of these areas to actually preserve the properties for future use? And it's kind of called the concept of mothballing the building. And that was when the fencing, the electrical services were all added into the building to try to just stall the continued deterioration of those properties. That was a city initiative. The city paid for the consulting work. They basically are forcing the landowners to do something. In the case of School District 43, they actually re-roofed the building. They painted the building. All of the buildings have power in it. But to what extent it's actually preserving the buildings would be a little bit of a question mark, because it's basic mothballing. That's all it is. At the same in 2017, this is when Gillick revealed their plan to restore the Tremaine residence, and as I said earlier, it's basically suspended at this point. 2015 to 19 is when I've indicated when they did all of the work to do the preservation and maintenance as per the new city guidelines, and I think that's important. The city did actually take some initiative to create those guidelines to preserve the buildings. But at this point, again, no agreement in place to revitalize what probably could be the easiest thing to try to do a little bit of revitalization on, and that would be on the lawn bowling green. So it kind of sits in its state as it was when there was earth pushed over to basically cover the bowling green and basically leave it as it is today. A new development, which we've observed in the last 2 to 3 months, is that Imperial Oil has been doing some remediation work on their portion of the town site. Remediation work, they're going in, they're excavating where the houses sat, They're taking out all of the soil that's there. They're replacing with clean soil. I've got a question out to Imperial Oil based on some recent contacts we've had to say, is this changing your future plans for use of the property? Why would they be doing the revitalization or the remediation work? Haven't received a response, but is there some contemplative move by Imperial Oil to maybe put that property up for sale because the essence of a buffer zone may or may not be as applicable as it had originally been put forward? But it's interesting that they're doing this environmental remediation, and I haven't been out to the site recently, but I think they're fairly well completed most of the work that they were doing in the last 2 to 3 months. So let's talk about what the city's goals are. So there's a history of the property. What were the city's goals when they put together the Heritage Conservation Bylaw? Specifically, they put it in the last OCP update, which was approved in 2014, they made minimal changes to what had been written as the original concept for the IOCO town site recreation and revitalization. There's a fairly extensive appendix that sits in the city's OCP today, and if you were to read that appendix today versus what was in the OCP that preceded it, there have been minimal changes. Now, there is some contemplation of changes forthcoming, and I don't want to get into the politics around that, but there are certain clauses that are in the appendix that basically reference such things as the David Avenue connector. So just to be aware that the language that's in this particular guideline in the OCP is currently under discussion at City Hall. More importantly though, the city also has a heritage strategic plan. So as any organization, they have different subsections of strategy that's undertaken. The latest update on this was done in 2016 for 2016 to 22. And interesting enough, again, this language has not changed from the previous Heritage Strategic Plan. So there's been nothing changing in the city's committed intent on what to do with this land. So the city will explore opportunities to conserve, restore, and enhance the integrity of the town site and its residential community structures, working in cooperation with the landowners. So the landowners we're talking about here is any landowner. It's not the original landowner, it's the landowners as they currently sit. So if there was another change of property between, say, Gillick and X, that landowner still falls under the same requirements to be working in cooperation with the city. But very specifically, the strategic plan said, enhance the heritage program, work towards restoration and redevelopment as a living community, continue dialogue with Imperial, and by the time this plan was updated, Brilliant Circle was already in the mix regarding the future plans for IOCO. And very specifically, this is the one that catches my attention, work with the school board. If you're out on the site and you take a look at the buildings that are there, this is my perception right now. Probably the building with the greatest degree of potential immediate restorational use is the original school. The original school was created by an architect who was a principal architect for the province of British Columbia. So that school design and structure is probably one of the last, if not the last remaining building of its type in the province. So it has a fairly significant provincial importance. But the fact that the school district, and through communication that I am engaging with people at the school board at this point in time, has indicated two things. They have no particular future use for the school. So, okay, it's not going to be a school. And the fact that that land size, the property that makes up the school property today, would not qualify as a land tract large enough to support a new school. So in effect, this is just an asset sitting in School District 43's books that they could effectively sell and put in the bank, and somebody with more and interest in doing some revitalization could possibly take use of it. But it's interesting that in clarity right now, the school district has no use for the building, although they continue to keep it warm and keep the roof sort of solid. But they couldn't use it even if they wanted to build a new school because currently under provincial guidelines, the property is not large enough. Interesting findings over the last little while. I'm still waiting to get some more information back from them, but that was interesting to find in the last month and a half.
Sorry, Rob, how large is that property?
I don't know the actual spec on it, but apparently based on, again, guidelines that the school districts have to use to size out a piece of property for a school, the current lot is not large enough to accommodate what would be the school, the associated playground, I guess other public space that they have to have around it. So getting to closing on this particular drawing is extracted right out of the appendix of the OCP. This was a conceptual plan for the town site as envisioned in 2002. Now you'll note that there's things on it, it's pretty busy if you see it here, but you know, there was going to be waterfront exposures being put in place along Burrard Inlet. There was potentially for some other than standard single house developments there, but it was a conceptual plan envisioned in 2002 by the city. So we have a call for action. 2002, the city had a vision. Since 2002, they failed to deliver on the vision. We're basically, you know, getting on to 20 years into this and nothing has really transpired. Current actions by all parties continue to risk losing the key physical elements of the HCA. IOCO heritage is not just physical, it's actually environmentally and cultural. When you go out to the site, you get a sense out there from a standpoint of what it was to be a village, what it was like to be in those types of town sites. And you can create those types of villages even within a city. It doesn't have to be just, you know, a city unto itself. You can create a village within. And I think if we look at neighborhoods, neighborhoods are in fact little villages. And IOCO represents that. It's also cultural too. This represents a period of our time. Now, granted, there's periods that preceded our time, and there's periods that will follow our time. But this represents a period of our time that we really should try to protect and retain and restore and revitalize. From my standpoint, the city has the most to lose and yet the most to gain in doing something on the site. The city, though, because they are ones that are enacting some of this, they are the ones that basically worked with the original property owners to create this, need to be the facilitator. They cannot just stand back and sort of hope that things will happen. They need to be more a facilitator to basically execute on the plan. So the city established the IOCO vision in 2002. What actions will the city take to preserve, rehabilitate, and ultimately to revitalize the IOCO HCA as it was originally envisioned to be? Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. We'll take questions, and because we are filming this, we would like to have you come up to the microphone and ask a question, if you can do that. If that works? I guess it works. So is there anybody that has a question?
It isn't a question. I was a little devoid in my introduction in not recognizing our two Freedom of the City recipients are with us here today. Mary Ann and Elaine Golds. Thank you for coming.
Don't be shy.
Good afternoon. I had a question regarding the school on the land you were discussing. If sold by SD 43, could then the school be demolished, or is there a clause to keep the school standing as it is, even if it was sold by the school district?
Protections of the HCA remain intact for the new landowner. The new landowner, in my mind, would have greater interest, though, in actually doing something that would actually preserve and rehabilitate and use the school building.
But is not legally bound to do so.
Not legally bound to do so, but I think if you found the right owner, they would have a genuine interest in wanting to do that, because they would be buying the property with an interest of that revitalization. I can't say today what the current mindset is of the owners of the Gillett property owners. But certainly in all of their discussions they've had with us when they made their first acquisition of the property and they started to talk to us about some of their plans, they have a genuine interest in working on the revitalization, as well as what they needed to do to actually build out the village. So in the case of the school district, same situation. They don't have a desirable development interest in the property. They're holding it for whatever purposes they need, which is probably more just cash. So if you had somebody else to come in that had more of that developmental type perspective, they would probably find a way or have an idea of a way of how they could actually take the current structure, rehabilitate it, but doing something else with it. I'm not going to put in place any type of preferred idea, but I'll give you a sense of what somebody could think of. You have two structures on the site. You have the original school and you also have the gymnasium that was built at subsequently. The heritage value probably exists more so in the original school, probably not in the gymnasium. But let's say the gymnasium could still be used. A property owner could come in and say, maybe rather than the rest of the land just being what would have been the playground for the school, maybe we can actually build something on there that we can use partial proceeds of that to help with the revitalization of the other building. I've heard of that and seen it done in some other jurisdictions where there's been an older building, a development company or an owner comes in and says, I'm interested in protecting the property, but to do that, I'm going to be doing this beside it. Okay, so that could be worked on, but again, at this point in time, there seems to be no genuine interest by the school district to even contemplate that.
Thank you, very comprehensive.
I'll just add a little bit to that, that any of the property owners would have to apply to get what's called a heritage alteration permit through the city, and that's in addition to any developmental building permits. So the heritage alteration permit could go as far as having to have council approval, and they could apply for a demolition permit, but then council would have to approve that.
Hi, I'm Roy. I live in the town site with my wife and family. Just a question is, I guess the recent development of Anmore on Sunnyside Road, there's going to be an influx of well over, 4,000 people, which is like a huge, I don't know how to put it in words, development that's happening just I would say north of IOCO. But do you have any insight on how that's going to affect probably IOCO over the development?
I don't have any specifics with regards to how it would directly impact the town site, the heritage conservation and restoration of the town site. I think you're bringing up more of a broader question with respect to the overall development in the northwest sector, including Anmore, Belcaire. There's no doubt going to be challenges, okay, in whatever happens with the prospective plans that are going on in Anmore to whatever happens in the balance of Port Moody. Interesting enough, in addition to what's being contemplated there, as we're all aware, that there is discussion right now to remove the special study area covenants that sits over top of the town site as well as the adjacent property. It's been suggested that by removing that, you get upwards of another 110 residents within the area. Well, in fact, based on the information that we've seen so far, it could create the equivalent of over 250 actual residential family occupants in the area, because the underlying zoning for the single family lots would allow for single family, plus potentially allowance for secondary suites, plus in some cases, carriage houses based on the size of the lot. Okay. So, it's interesting that all of this is a very complex matter in that whole northwest sector. My concern is the heritage conservation of the town site, what we can do there. And I'm just concerned that as we move along further and further, we're going to lose that intended purpose from 2002 to say it's a conservation village. Your home, as well as the one other, represents sort of the basis on what we should be trying to do within the town site.
Well, absolutely, but I'm just saying it's relative because it's so close.
I agree.
And that's the relevance also, I guess you say, is, when you were discussing over the city facilitating has to, facilitate some type of action or meat and potatoes per se on what really the vision is all about. And I mean, wouldn't it be more prudent for the city to actually buy the property and lease it out, and where they can still retain ownership and have money for the, builder or something like that, or subsidize a builder to do this vision. I guess what I'm trying to say, other options.
I would say there are a number of prospective options out there. The city could actually work itself to do something, but the city could work with the current property owners. When the city put in place the bylaw to create the HCA, they did it with a conceptual vision. They should be trying to facilitate that vision. Now, whether it means the type of option you're suggesting, that would be potentially one. Could be. I won't say it's the right one, but it
Right.
could be one.
Yeah,
Could be
just
others.
throwing ideas.
But the challenge is that at this point in time, if you look at where we are today to where we were then, nothing has happened.
Exactly.
Right? So we're basically sitting there in a static mode. And that's not good from the standpoint of the intended purpose of creating the HCA and what we wanted to see out of it for everybody.
Right.
Okay? So there are probable options that are out there, but it probably does require the city to be more the facilitator of that. I
I guess
say,
what I'm trying to say, what would be facilitation, like an example in your vision? What would you?
I'm not a planner, but I would say that where you have seen such developments happen in, and I'm not going to sort of compare it from a standpoint of the comparability, but let's just use it as an area in Vancouver. When you look at what's happened in Yaletown,
Yeah.
okay, I think in the Yaletown concept, the city took a lot of proactive steps to basically make that happen. To the fact that they buy land to do it? No, they probably facilitated the other property owners. Gastown, similarly, okay? Now, you could go to another extreme and say Granville Island, which is owned by the federal government. So there are different models, but you have to be proactive. You just can't sit and hope, okay? And so that's where I'm sensing we are right now. There's sort of a hope it's going to happen, and that's not going to get you anywhere in this type of environment.
I so agree. I mean, we've been part of this for a long time, and of course, hope is great, but we really want to see again some action. And what you're discussing is, I'm really on board with it. I think it's something that really council should address, because this 20 years journey has reached a point now where if it's gone this far in 20 years, what's it going to be another 20 years? So if we don't actually do the action, or at least see some action, we actually won't go nowhere. And I so agree with what you're saying, and I thank you for everything.
Other questions? There's a mic right there for you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure you have some idea of this, but what is the size of the town site,
Oh, you're going to ask me those.
approximately?
22 acres, 11 owned by Gillick.
Yeah.
And the rest by
Well, yeah, 22 is the town site. So take that roughly in half. So half of it by Gillick, half by Imperial Oil, which is the buffer zone. So that's roughly what you're looking at.
And what do we know of the current intentions of the owners of the land?
At this point in time, as I commented, my conversations with School District 43 have been such that they have no specific future use of the property, aside from just maintaining it in its current static state. They would be, if somebody came with a bucket full of money that wanted to do some restoration on the school for whatever purpose, they gladly take the money and keep the school, but that's probably not going to happen. So their interest is more, let's just keep it for the purpose that we want to keep it for. In the understanding we have of right now of Gillick, or Brilliant Circle as it was previously called, we believe that they've suspended any type of work with respect to any plans for the property, so they've stepped right back. Mentioned earlier that they were looking at doing the restoration work on the Tremaine residence. They've stopped any of that type of work. There may have been some other compromising issues that came up in doing the restoration, but still they're not proceeding on it. In the case of Imperial Oil, aside from the fact they've done the remediation work recently on their part of the property, I have an outstanding inquiry to them to ask them, do they have any future plans for it that they have not so far disclosed? Because at this point, our understanding is it's strictly a buffer zone. They would much rather have no buildings on that property whatsoever. And if they could restrict public access, because if it's considered an industrial buffer zone, you kind of put a fence around an industrial buffer zone. You don't leave it wide open for public access. And of course, we know the status of the church. You know, and we know the church has gone through some of its own challenges, but still it's an active congregation, and they will continue as they see fit to use the building. So that's our current understanding of the property owners, with the exception of the private property owners, and I'll let them speak for themselves. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Robert, you broached the topic of the removing the special study overlay, which seems likely to happen, as it appears, at least from now that it has the support of a majority of council. And I'd like to build from that, starting even before. We have a history that I think you can generalize, and I think it was quite pointed on your final slide, that essentially we've had 18 years of neglect. A reluctant landowner, and I guess a reluctant city council as well, who really only enforced their policies and rules when they were prodded to do so, largely by people in this room. Now this proposal, which is coming to council in a couple of weeks and looks quite likely to pass, it's the boldest move in IOCO in 18 or 20 years. And I think that puts the question to council is, well, what's your intent with this? What do you foresee as the effect of it, and what's next in realizing the goals that you set in 2002? I think the question isn't really to you as the presenter today. I think the question is has got to go to council in the near future. Well, why are you doing this? What do you think it will achieve, and what next? Because it's not an end to itself. I think it needs to be a path to revitalization.
Yeah, I don't. My comment is, and I've made it publicly, to me it's creating unintended consequences. And you hear this in some other commentary. There's no strategy. There's a tactic of a desire to do something, but there's no strategy that's really being brought forward as to how to basically evolve and get to this vision that was established in 2002. Because there's been no comment stated that the vision doesn't make sense. Okay, so the vision is still there. So this is again another state of just a tactic or an action that's not in any way advancing the vision. That's and whether there was a special study overlay on or off the land, my view right now, it doesn't make much difference from a standpoint of the status of the heritage conservation area.
I would have to concur on all points.
It's still the HCA. It still has all of the parameters as outlined within the appendix of the OCP. So it's an action which unfortunately could create some other unintended consequences not foreseen, and could be detrimental ultimately to delivering on the vision.
Yeah, I'd have to agree on pretty well all those points. I don't think it doesn't preclude or prevent revitalization of the town site, but how does it possibly advance those goals? By itself, it doesn't. You got to do more. And like I say, it doesn't necessarily preclude the goal that we all share, but it doesn't seem at face value how it advances it, and that should be the goal of everyone involved. Thanks.
Hi, Willie Martin, for those of you who don't know me. Kudos to the family still living on the IOCO town site. Great respect from me, because that speaks volumes. Last year, Marianne made a very, very poignant comment at the end of one of council meetings, and when she spoke up with all of her 104 years of wisdom and said to council, "You have no plan." And that said it all. But I'm here really to speak as the president of Tropica, which is the residents of Pleasant Side IOCO communities. And our board has discussed the town site. And we are 100% on board with the preservation of this historical area. And I made that promise to Marianne, and we continue to honor that. I think I see a couple of issues that have affected this. One, we have had a developer, and I want to acknowledge this publicly, and I'm not afraid to do so. But the developer has spent over $2 million in the last year or two in putting up security fencing, removing industrial rubbish that was left in terms of asbestos contaminated construction materials that someone kindly dumped on the IOCO town site, removing squatters, trying to put heating into the houses. And I think we have to put a little bit of credit there. That's $2 million out of his pocket that many people wouldn't have done. And I want to acknowledge that, because I think we've heard a lot more about how this is a foreign, Chinese, offshore, very negative perception of the people who came and bought this property right from the get-go. And they weren't even given an opportunity to actually present a proposal to the city. And I personally feel that was wrong. They tried from the get-go, from my experience, to engage with the community, and by having the open houses, and that process came to a stop when we changed our council. And since that time, it's been a very antagonistic situation we've had, where I think, putting myself in their shoes, and I'm not them, but when you're saying to someone, we're not giving you an opportunity to do anything but lose money on your investment in this area, it's no wonder that they're going to focus somewhere where there's better potential for them. I believe in this. Quirky little me with very lousy imagination, but you know, why couldn't the school, for example, be a performing arts center for, like they have in Chemainus? They do little plays there, and we could have an artistic community of little houses around there for work studios, for artists. We talk about this is the city of the arts. There are many, many different things that could happen on that town site. I come from Edmonton. We have Fort Edmonton. It was a conglomeration of different eras around the city that were put together into one comprehensive development in the river valley. And so what they developed was, you could walk from the 1800s when it was a fort, you then went to the 1900s when it became the province, and you went further in the history of the city. That was a vision that someone had, that they created, and it is a tourist draw. It brings in money, it employs people. The Burnaby Village Museum is another site. Winter is magic there. They have brought together the history of that community, and they've created a go-to destination place that's wonderful for families, etc. Why can't we do that here? And we can. And so I'm just saying, whatever we can do as a community association to support this vision, I want to encourage people that while right now we have a council that has a certain direction, council answers to us. And as a community, I have seen councillors turn on a dime, depending on the public support or animosity towards a certain presentation. So if we believe this and we can generate that support, that means we need to enlist others to write to councillors, write to individual councillors about why this is important. We need to lobby. We need to get as political as those who are against this vision. And that's where I'm coming from. We need to support what you're doing, both in writing, in person, and if necessary, by raising funds, whatever we have to do to get together to ensure that this doesn't get lost. Because if we don't preserve this as you say now, it will be gone. It will be so sad. Those buildings will fall apart. And then what will replace it will be really, really nothing compared to what we're losing. So that's my little rant, and I'm sticking to it.
Good going, Willie. I have a real concern and a real worry about IOCO, and I think it's just one great big mess. I understood when Brilliant Circle Group bought that half, that the buildings would eventually, they were being looked after by Brilliant Circle Group and would come over to their side of the site when they started to redevelop, because they, if I recall correctly, were really thinking of trying to incorporate all these old places. And that was really, really good, and I think people were quite happy about that. And they did come in, and they did put in fans into the buildings, and tried their best at the time, putting wraps on the roofs, which have been a bit of a disaster over the last few years. But I go up there fairly often to walk, and I'm finding that all the fans aren't working like they used to. I used to be able to hear them at each of the houses that I went by, and a lot of them I'm not hearing that sound anymore. So I'm wondering if something has happened and they've broken down or whatever. And I'm hoping these people who are going in to check the houses will be able to do something about that. Also, I'm noticing that some of the houses are starting to lose shingles. There's the house up the hill just past Tremaine Residence, where the shingles that are on the bottom are starting to fall off now. I mean, talk about a perfect place for rodents and whatever else to get in. So it really worries me that the longer everybody waits, the worse it's going to be. Like, they're not going to be able to move, well, the gross deteriorate 5 years from now, I wouldn't think. The recreation hall maybe, because it still seems to be fairly stable, although now I'm noticing graffiti on the side of it. It is just so sad to see us losing this wonderful site up there. And honestly, I just wish these people would all get together and just work together and, you know, sort out their differences and get things going. That's it. That's it.
You want me to give you the microphone?
For Mary Ann.
I would like to add something. In 2002, the two partners were the city and and Imperial Oil. They both agreed that this area had potential because it was it was a beautiful community at the time. And the buildings were in first-class condition and things were okay. And so they agreed upon that. Now, Imperial Oil said to the city, you know, let's do it. As you saw that drawing up there, they saw development, revitalization, they saw development, but nothing happened. Who did they expect it to do? Imperial Oil wasn't going to rebuild it. They expected the city to do something because the city was the one that approached them to save that area. So let's go on with it. Let's save it. But nothing happened, and the maintenance which was provided for that time was maintenance of a healthy community, healthy buildings, healthy everything. But as deterioration occurred, the maintenance became a different kind of an item. It became really a rebuilding of community, which was the community itself was disappearing. Houses and so forth were deteriorating, and the agreement which they made in 2002 didn't cover rebuilding the community. It was maintaining the building, which the Imperial Oil assumed that the city would do, and they did not. So then the Imperial Oil said, no way, we're not in the business of making a city or a village. We've had our so-and-so with this area. You take it, you do it. So they wouldn't, they backed away from it. And also they said, this is private land and you could stay off of it. You don't have any, we're not gonna cooperate with the rebuilding of the city, so you just keep out of it. And they refused the city inspection over a period of years, and being a private company, why they had power to do that. They wouldn't let the city in. The city couldn't get in, and the agreement really was 2002, a partnership agreement. So in 2015, the city, the planning department revised that maintenance arrangement. They had what we call a prize-winning maintenance plan submitted by Mary DePauli in 2015, showing just what had to be done. You have to do something to this site, you owners. You haven't been doing anything over the year. It's gone to disrepair. Now you have to bring it back, because this was an agreement in this site of a partnership. So it required improving the original community to an extent where it would no longer deteriorate, and do the best they can. And Don Luxton wrote this maintenance item, but again, it simply stated what was the deficiency of the 2002 agreement. It brought up the maintenance important, and furthermore, it contained a clause which had a really hefty penalty. A daily amount of money would be inflicted on the owners if they did not do that. But that was never enforced. But as a result of that agreement, the city began planning what to do with this site. And in 2016, they came out with another plan, a heritage preservation plan. And this covered a period from 2016 to 2022. And it had in it quite a few plans of what suggestions, 4 different kind of approaches which the city might use to handle the problems which they now had, and how to maintain it, how to bring it forth, how to create it, so forth, as a heritage area. It was revitalization sort of thing, how to make it a living community, and those words are in that plan, a living community. Well, that was all very well, but they put the implementation of it in 2 of their agencies, the Planning Department and in the Heritage Commission. The Planning Department can only do a certain amount of things, and usually at the command of the Commission. So they were, over the years from 2016 to now, they have selected certain things that they have done in relation to that plan and are still doing it. But it has not changed the situation. They've done the best they could as the planning department's function, and the Heritage Commission, which only meets once a month, is only an advisory group to the council. So they were only able to take commands from the council or suggest action maybe, so they were not an effective, they couldn't really, they weren't equipped officially to handle the action that was hoped for in that plan that was just made by Don Luxton again. So the whole thing just didn't really make much difference, because the existing powers that the council had, namely the Planning Department and the Heritage Commission, simply just weren't the right ones to carry out. Their own functions were well defined, and it did not include taking over the management of heritage. So now what do we have? The city does not have any implementing department which looks after heritage. That's a very important item. They have a sports department that looks after sports. They have various departments which handles the implementation of programs. So we have a heritage program in Port Moody, but there is no management organization in the city which takes care of the ongoing problems, which handles negotiation, which communicates with council, which has a budget. There is no budget for this plan. So I think we have a very big need for the city to look and face it, that if they really want a living community out of this area, they have got to say so. And if they say they really want it, they've got to pay for it. There is no way they can get around this, getting somebody else to pay for it. It will continue to be a developer's profit, not a city's profit. And the city has to define and say what they want to do with it and realize the benefits from it, and then go about obtaining them by the methods, with the help of this plan, which Don Luxton performed, and any other plan which comes up, which is really built around arbitration. So I think that we need to point out to the city that they need to put a budget on this, they need to put a department on it, they've got to have some implementing official body who works at it, just like the planning department works at their jobs. But all of this would be in cooperation with the complete city because it's a part of the city's OCP. So it makes sense to see the city take this on and make a very useful part of the city out of the heritage areas. Thank you.
I should have had Mary Ann do the presentation.
Still teaching.
She's still teaching me, yeah. There might be some other questions, but just to make you aware of one or two items that are transpiring within the next 2 or 3 days. So a shorter portion of this particular presentation actually, as a delegation on Tuesday evening, is going to be presented to council. This presentation in its whole was presented to the Heritage Commission back in November. And at that time, the Heritage Commission, Mary Ann makes good comments about the fact about the Heritage Commission's capabilities vis-a-vis its mandate. But they, on unanimous support, wanted this to go to council in a fashion that I can get to it from a delegation perspective, which you're only allowed 5 minutes? No. This week in the Committee of the Whole. So that will be on Tuesday. So if you wish to come to that and provide public input with respect to the support of this particular discussion going forward, please do so. The other thing I just wanted to outline, and Mary Ann makes a very good comment, as does Wilhelmina, and that is, this is not in any way to berate or downplay what the landowners have done or are doing. This is basically stating that based on current actions that have been transpiring over many years, this is where we are. And it was not where the city had expected to be when it established the bylaw in 2002. They would have expected then that we would have had some progress with respect to the work on the true restorational work, the rehabilitation, and the revitalization of the town site. So everybody kind of has their own role to play in it, but from a standpoint of the facilitation of it, I would not in any way disagree with Mary Ann's comment. The city has to be a strong facilitator of this to take place. How they do that can be discussed, but they have to be a strong facilitator because they're the ones that have sort of established the bylaw. If you had a private property, of which many of us do, you basically do your work based on the bylaws that are in place around your property. Okay, in this case, there's a bylaw that's around this piece of land called a Heritage Conservation Area, so help facilitate the reality that you're wanting. And that's kind of the bottom line message we're wanting to put out here to say, 2020, 2021, 100th year anniversary for the establishment of this as a town site. This is the year to make some progress on basically getting to the desired intent of what that bylaw stated in 2002. One question in the back?
Yes, sir.
Do you want to come up to the mic?
Sure. I'm one of the other family members that are living out there. My name is Ludlow. We went out there, my great-grandfather came out to Anwar area in about 1916. We've been about a piece of ground up there. I'm the last on that piece of ground, 100 years. I grew up, my father grew up in IOCO. He went to school at that school. I went to school there. And my dad worked at the refinery. Grandfather worked there, both 38 years apiece. I got a chance to work there, but not too long. I think I've been in Powell River. They embrace their heritage up there. They have the town site. They look after it. It's very important to them up there. The Bowling Green, they had people from South Africa bowling there. I've got a fair number of antiques. You might say I'm sort of a living antique myself. I personally would love to see anything done down there in IOCO. My father, when he was alive, he says, I would rather see them bulldoze it to the ground than leave it in the state that it was in, because he hated to see it deteriorate. He loved IOCO. He wanted to see life brought back into it again. The store, there are about 4 30 by 30 beams, vertical beams in that store. When Denny was alive, he said if I wanted to put a post or a picture in there, he had to drill a hole in it because it would just bend the nail over. I've got, Denny was kind enough to give me the chopping block, the weigh scale, meat cutter, paper roll, and cash register. And a clock that was in there was a mission clock. It was built the same time I was, 1957. So I also have the old original flags from the Bowling Green and some of the balls from there. Daddy gave those to me as well, because he knows I love old stuff. And anything that you can do down there, if I'm available to work, I would work. I would love to see that back up, because the stairway at the Bowling Green, when you come up, it would be approximately 30 to 40 feet. On the right-hand side, there was a drinking fountain there. I used to drink from that when I was a kid. All your lamp standards out here were those ones. So if you bring it back, would Moody be willing to take all these back to IOCO and put them back up? Because that's where they come from.
I won't speak for the society, but I think there would be very strong consideration of that. It basically says if that's where the original provenance was for those, that probably is where they should be if we're basically trying to recreate a village. But I will not speak on behalf, that's a personal view.
Anything that came from IOCO, it would be wonderful. It was put back there, put back up where it was. Moody, thank God for them, at least they refurbished them and got the lights back on. It would be wonderful to see them back on there. I personally am really happy about the Mary Ann's grouping of getting the IOCO days fired up. It is amazing the number of people that show up for that every year. Rain or shine, they're out there. It's great. I love to see that, and I try to attend to that every year. Roy, he's done a beautiful job, both him and his wife, of his house. Both his house and the Ludlow house there has got the brass plaque of the Heritage Society. I believe it's the only 2 up there in all of IOCO. And it's good because I personally want to do all that I can to maintain that down there. I'm looking after the house now that Mom's incapacitated right now. But keep the hedge done because it's a reflection not only on the family, but on IOCO. You got to keep it up maintain it, and say, hey, we're here. We're not going into the last person that had anything to do with IOCO and lived here is gone. And so I guess I'm about the last one of the last ones that attended that school, that lived there, that walked all over everything. And I love that place. And I love Anmore because those areas there, people from Anmore came down to that school. Once the little one-room schoolhouse got torn down up there, which is where the fire hall is today, corner of East Road and Sunnyside. And it's great to see heritage. I love it. I love history. I've got probably one of the few horse-drawn hay mowers around that still work. I'm just waiting to grow some more grass up there so I can get the hay. I'm going to have to get somebody on the back of the hay mower because I can't get in both places. Maybe Jim will. But anything that you can be doing down there would be awesome.
Well, I think, yourself, Roy, and both your families, have a very unique context from a standpoint of bringing that to life, from a standpoint of our discussions here and discussions even in front of council, from a standpoint of what the IOCO town site means as a heritage site within the community and as a living village within the community. So, anything we can do, we will attempt to do. Anything you can do the same, because you need to have that type of personal reflection. I can speak to it as an individual that has an interest. I can't speak to it as an individual that lived in the town site or had a family member that lived in the town site. You folks can't. So there's a very different perspective you can put on the discussion that really then says, yes, there is the concept of a village that's there. Even the elements that are still remaining still represent a village, and that's what we need to build upon. One comment that I have heard relative to the revitalization discussions has always been, are you going to create something that sort of looks like a recreation of everything that was there in the past? No. I believe the revitalization is a reflection of what was there in the past. So you're not there to basically reconstruct every house and building that was on the site at that time. You want to create something that's a reflection of it, because truly there would be changes over time, but you don't want to basically go to the ultimate extreme that everything is becoming ultra-modern. And I think that's the bylaw states that. It's a reflection of what was the village, as compared to creating a brand new ultra-modern community that has no bearing and reflection as to what the village was.
No, if it could be retained along the same architectural designs, that'd be awesome.
And that's the reflection. That's not sort of designing as per, it's the reflection of, because some people have said, well, you're just going to make a Disneyland out of it.
No.
And that's what you're not wanting to do, okay?
It's not faux heritage.
Yeah.
What IOCO is in here. It's not something that you can design.
It's a cultural and environmental. Those are the two strong points as well as the physical structures, but you got the cultural and the environmental, because there is certainly an environmental component that sits out there as well.
It's also the people in the community as well.
Pardon me?
It's also the people in the community.
Oh yeah, it's the living
That's
person.
the essence of Port Meeting, right?
Everything, anything that was done up there in Imperial, like they used to have a separation box just ahead of the cooling towers, and some of the water from Shannon Lake used to go into there, and then they'd separate it, and that separation box is pretty close to the creek that runs through there, down between 4th and 3rd. Even when I was a kid, I used to smell oil there years ago, and apparently supposedly that's what is happening now from their work that they've had there. They've dug up the area that used to have the septic tank, was right in front of the store. That's what was there. It used to have big logs around it, but they've dug there. I don't know what they're doing. I haven't been able to find out from anybody around there. I've asked a few times, but it kind of slid me to the side. I said, I live here, and I said, I'd like to know what's going on down here.
Well, I have an outstanding email to a representative of Imperial Oil, and I'm not sure how open they'll be with me with some context, but I'm trying to ask some of the same questions as to what their plans are for the properties.
Well, I'd like to thank you, and Mary Ann, you guys are doing an awesome job. Thanks kindly.
Hey, Robert. So one thing with the church and it being there is, as of September, as you're well aware, is there's Inlet United now. So St. Andrews and IOCO have kind of merged and are bouncing around a bit. So that as a building and as a structure, obviously they were probably going to need support as they move forward, because it's their home, but they're not there all the time anymore. So just something to be obviously be aware of.
Yeah, certainly I don't have all the detailed knowledge, but you're right in the fact that the congregation of IOCO United has become much smaller, and so there was some issues, and I know that there's been then the amalgamation with St. Andrews to basically make a larger congregation that will basically manage the two properties once the new church is built. So yes, it is. It puts the church at risk, possibly. I think the parishioners that are there now are doing their utmost to ensure that it's not put at risk. And with the one commercial venture that they do have within the church, which is the daycare, does help sort of offset some of the costs, but that may not be the capability to do it forever. Okay? Yes?
I'll be very brief. So I really want to thank the Society, the museum, for pushing this ahead and making more people aware of it. I'm glad this many people are here. I'm sure that we need to really push forward and get more people to be aware of what's happening there, or else it'll be like Joni Mitchell's song, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. So just one last comment. Years ago, and I can't remember when it was, but maybe Marianne remembers, she was presenting at council in the public input. She had her heritage dress on, and it was probably to promote IOCO Days. But one thing she said was, she said, last night the IOCO community hall burned down. And there was this hush in the crowd and this, oh, you're kidding. And she said, well, it didn't, but it could. We've got to do something. So I just wanted to end on that and thank Marianne for her pushing ahead on this as much as she can as well, because she's feisty and she's on this too.
Well, certainly, yeah.
Hi, my name is Danu. I'm actually a resident of Port Coquitlam, and I was invited here by Sandra. So thank you, Sandra, for inviting me, and it's an honor to meet yourself, Marianne. I've been listening to what you guys have been saying, and for 20 years, you're right, it's been a long time that no action has been taken, and it's a lot of talking and going back and forth. And I'm a developer myself, but I'm a small-time developer, but I kind of have an idea as to why it's taken this long. And it might even take longer. However, though, I've been known to be getting or to offer solutions to what's going on. I love history. I love museum. Anything to do with the past or the meaning or purpose of kind of like where someone came from is quite a good passion of mine. I think Marianne and I kind of connected on at the very beginning of this whole thing. So I do have a solution for what we have here. So what I want to do is, instead of just talking to the city hall and talking amongst ourselves, is actually create a concrete plan that I have in my head right now, a vision of what we can do. So after this, gathering, if anybody's interested and wanted to discuss more of some of the ideas that I had that actually I can see actually be solidified, that would be great. As a developer myself, we can build it out ourselves within ourselves. So one of the ideas that I had was actually create our own nonprofit society on this venture, to actually take actions ourselves and just make it happen ourselves. And I got some ideas on how we can generate revenue for our nonprofit as well too, to actually make something happen and preserve what we have here, and so forth. So, and Sandra will be connecting with me as well too, and I would connect with yourself as well, just go over some ideas, and we would execute it, because it's already like clicking.
Wheels
here.
are turning.
It's turning, yeah, I know exactly what to do.
Well, that's
exactly what to do.
And today's, I appreciate you're here, because today's event was intended to try to create those types of opportunities.
Yes.
Just because, for whatever reasons, those have not necessarily come forward in the past. So if you've those types of ideas, great to bring them forward. I like the concepts of nonprofits from a standpoint of some of the work that I do as well. It's how we work with putting that all together. So appreciate that, and I know that there'll be contacts made. So.
Yeah, and I know that we can't just wait for things to happen, because people have other, we all live busy lives, right? Yeah. But there's something inside my spirit to actually go ahead with this, and I think a nonprofit to fund this venture would be the best avenue to go, and also to see Marianne's face as well too once we dig the shovel in the ground and start. I think that's my main objective and goal. So there you go.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We can stay around afterwards and talk some more, but we've lost a few people, and before any more leave, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out this afternoon, and also hope you haven't seen anything that would be considered political in this presentation, because it's not. We've been referring to the OCP, we've been referring to the work of the Heritage Commission, we've been referring to the recommendations in the Parks and Rec Master Plan. These are city objectives, and all we're asking is that we try and get the conversation to support the city to move this forward. So Robert's mentioned Tuesday night, the delegation. I'd encourage all of you to come out. Please state your any ideas you've got or any questions you've got. It's an ideal opportunity to put it onto, bring it back onto the front burner of the City Council. Thank you very much. Mary Ann, you want to say something?
I just wanted to add that the law, that the plan that Don Luxon presented on the 2016-2022 was not just for IOCO. It was a plan for the city, how the city is going to handle heritage. And this means that the city is thinking of a plan which they would integrate into the departmental structure they have now in some manner, so that they could manage and stay abreast of developments and be creative as well. This process would involve public participation, and it's another reason why we should hope that the city will take this on as an official move towards integrating it into the city.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, and John, thank you for the comments, and
Thank you.
I think we'll, if there's any other question you want to raise, we can do it sort of offline, but thank you all for coming out, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.